WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on there. I want to thank you for being with us today. Each and every Tuesday at 2:30, we air a show that we call an information education show. It's about information that you need to know about, maybe a bit of education to get us better informed and dialed into some of the things happening not only in Sampson but surrounding areas. We cover a number of counties on radio and TV channel 16 with Star Communications. Also, there's a summation printed in the Sampson Weekly newspaper, and we appreciate those folks doing that for us. Today, we're talking about a subject that is always close to, interesting, and that you really need to know a lot about, and that is planning and zoning here in Sampson County. We have with us Anita Lane. Anita is the Senior Planning Administrator here in Sampson County. She brought with her a fellow that a lot of folks know, Joel Starling. Both of these people have deep roots in Sampson County. If you remember Clyde Honeycutt, Clyde was your father, Anita, and a lot of folks knew Clyde, and we were so unfortunate we lost him a while back, and our deepest sympathies go to you and your family. Joel, you've got a family that's I've been, I guess, should I say involved with for a long time. I've known for a long time. Your father's been with the community college his entire career, really, and now the president of the community college. And Bill has been is and hopefully will continue to be a frequent guest of ours. And Joe, you're an attorney. You're the attorney for Sampson County. One of the first full-time attorneys, I believe, if I may be corrected on that.
We have, Sampson County had not had a full-time attorney since Rick Moorfield transitioned from county attorney actually to county manager some time ago. So I started working on a part-time basis as the county attorney in 2012, but was still in private practice, and then came on full-time as a staff attorney last July 1st. So.
I like to say this because to me it's just so impressive, but you were a Moorhead Scholar first, that's pretty cool. You attended UNC Chapel Hill, you got your law degree there, and you were a Phi Beta Kappa. I guess when I look at your background and somewhat of an academic stellar record, I'm very excited and impressed we can get both you guys to remain in Sampson County. Typically, it's kind of intriguing because, you know, we always hear we want to kind of retain some of our best and brightest here. What is it that keeps you here in Sampson County? And I want to start with Anita, because you could go anywhere you want to anyway, Anita.
I was born and raised in Sampson County. I have always enjoyed living in Sampson County, and actually I've never had the desire to move away from Sampson County. I love the people here. I love the county. My heart is in Sampson County. I've never had the desire to live anywhere else.
Well, Joel, I know you've got both your father, Bill, and Alta both. Your mother was a school teacher, and I think she still may be teaching a little bit. You've got deep roots here?
I do. I will confess that I was not always certain that I was going to move back to Sampson County. Anita and I may be a little bit different in that respect. There was a period of time when I was in school that I wasn't exactly sure that that was what I was going to do. You know, particularly when you spend 7-8 years in the research triangle, you know, making that transition back can be interesting at times, but I'm glad that I did, certainly. I think my wife, Annette, was part of that decision. She also has deep roots in this community. You know, both her parents are farmers in the Newton Grove, Dunn area.
She was a Chancey.
She was a Chancey prior to us getting married. I still call her Annette Chancey. She still shows up in my phone when she calls us Annette Chancey. But yeah, so that was part of our decision as well. But we're really, really glad that we made that decision because it's such a wonderful place to raise children,
it is,
primarily.
Indeed. And you do give up some of the amenities. I mean, as you said, if you've ever lived anywhere else and you come back, there's some things that you just discover you're not going to have here unless you drive 50 minutes or an hour and a half, and you have to do that.
Right.
And it's it's both fortunate and unfortunate because we also give up the traffic jam situation that sometimes for those of us that go to the Raleigh area 2 or 3 times a week, you don't have to face. So I guess that's a good thing. Yeah. So with that said, and you're back now, and both of you are well known. People know who you are. They, if nothing else, they know your family. Joel, your grandfather was the guy with the belt store here for years. I mean, he's like a icon for many people, and what a blessing to know him.
Yeah, and one thing that I was really glad that he got to see before he passed away was the refurbishment of that building that, of course, Alfredo's is now in. Absolutely. He just thought that that was the neatest thing, you know, going and seeing them refinish the wood floors and all that. So that brought a lot of joy to him. And
the last conversation I recall having with him was at that location at the grand opening of Alfredo's, and he was sitting on the second floor as you top those stairs and turn to the right. And I recall many years ago, as I was a little boy, how that building was configured. And as I best could remember when I saw him, I said, Billy, I said, you're sitting right here in the ladies, is this the underwear department or what? And the biggest smile. And then, of course, I opened the door, and he started telling me where everything was. And it's just, those moments are so treasured. They're so treasured, and they're so meaningful. With that said, and kind of getting folks to know you guys a little bit, some of the things that you're doing now and you've chosen to do, being part of the public sector environment here, is to kind of help guide folks not only in understanding but reasoning why certain things are. The idea of planning and zoning in environments has been around for some time, Joel, especially in the Raleigh area, Chapel Hill area, and that kind of thing. But for rural North Carolina, as growing up as a young person, as a child in rural North Carolina, if you need to put a building somewhere, you just put it. If you needed to build 2 tobacco barns and you could get it done in a week or ever how long it took your neighbors and everybody else to help you do it, you just put it there. You didn't have to ask anybody. And if somebody really questioned you, you would probably get somewhat of a tongue lashing. But now we're in a different world. Joel, what's changed? Back in the 40s and 50s, when did this start changing? And of course, I know you can't look back that far, but I know you've done your research. When did we start seeing a need to do this, and why?
So in the United States, the first zoning ordinance that I'm aware of was in the city of Los Angeles in 1908. And for a long period of time, zoning regulations were confined to those urban areas. I think New York City at first enacted zoning ordinances in 1916. And then you had some other communities throughout the United States begin to follow suit. The first time that the U.S. Supreme Court actually looked at zoning regulations and approved of them from a constitutional perspective was in 1926 with a case called the Village of Euclid, which is a landmark decision where, as I said, they approved of what was otherwise sort of questionable in terms of whether local governments had the authority to regulate development in the way that that village and other cities had begun to do. That has continued to spread to less densely populated areas in the country, and in fact is now very much a necessity even in rural eastern North Carolina. Our current zoning ordinance was enacted in 2004 and has been amended from time to time since then. But it is something that is necessary because it serves an important purpose in guiding. It's not just cosmetic in terms of wanting things to look a certain way, but helping ensure that development occurs in a way that is thought out and systematic, and that there aren't unintended negative outcomes, whether it be traffic congestion, blight, things of that nature.
Anita, I know since you've been with the county since 2005, I think.
I have.
And now this is kind of a new transition for you into this position. It seems to me that you've probably faced a lot of folks that you had to spend some time with, just kind of getting them dialed into why this particular permit is required and why they have to pay money for that and why they have to fill out a form and all this kind of stuff.
We have. Fortunately, we've not had a lot of people that were necessarily hard to explain things to. Normally when someone comes in and they want to add an addition onto their home or add an accessory building or things like that, we guide them through the steps that they need to take. Unfortunately, sometimes they put the structure there before they get the permit. And we try to guide them through the process. And normally that's not an issue. Sometimes there's things we have to critique and change around, and normally they are willing to do what they need to do in order to come into compliance. The city had jurisdiction over the zoning and planning up until July of this 2018. And the county created a one-stop shop because normally when you come into planning and zoning to get a permit, normally you wind up at environmental, health, and also inspections. And we have everything in one building under one roof so that when you finish in the zoning area, we can walk you over to the other side of the building where environmental health is, where you get your well and septic perk test done, and inspections, the building inspectors are there as well. So it creates a convenient one-stop shop for the citizens that has worked out really well, I think.
And I think with that said, oftentimes folks will tell you one of the things they don't want from government is the runaround. And that's what they're talking about, is that issue of going to multiple places, and they got a list of things they got to do, and you know, they've got everything together, they know where they want it, so they don't want that runaround.
Right.
And I think that's probably, looking at it from what I've read so far, is one of the key advantages of having the planning and zoning in one department here in Sampson County.
It's been interesting and enjoyable to be a part of getting this off the ground with the county. We take a lot of pleasure and take a lot of pride in helping the citizens of Sampson County. We're
going to take our first break, and we've got a couple more of these to do, but we're going to take our first break and we're going to come back and kind of dial in a little bit to some of the specifics of the zoning area in Sampson County. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. Stay with us, call a friend. We're talking about zoning, we're talking about planning right here in your county, right in your neighborhood, things you need to know, things may save you some money.
Experiencing slow internet? If you have a fast internet package, the problem is most likely your wireless router. With more devices using Wi-Fi, your wireless router may not be able to deliver the speed and coverage you need. We now have the leading solution to enhance your internet experience. Using small devices in a mesh network, these Wi-Fi appliances cover just about any size home so that all your devices can operate to their fullest potential. Whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Get the most out of your internet connection.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on there. I want to thank you for being with us today. I want to remind you to continue sending your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. That's weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. I appreciate your suggestions about upcoming shows, things we need to look into. Folks that have the expertise to talk in depth about subjects is one of the greatest advantages of what we try to do here. And plus, the other thing we try to do is give folks more than a 15, 20-second airtime to allow them to explain some of the issues that they're facing in their lives each and every day, and how that particular person or government entity or private sector may impact what they're doing. Today, we're dealing with one of those subjects, and we have literally a lot of folks that I guess that have impacted, been involved with, and talked to folks in the planning department. New for Sampson County, when I say new, 2018, is Anita Lane, senior planner in Sampson County. Also, Joel Starling, who is the county attorney. We were, I guess, blessed to be able to corner somebody with your age and background to stay here in Sampson County and help us through some of the legal issues, because a lot of it is legal. I want to start this segment with and this is kind of the mission statement, but to guide the physical development of Sampson County in a manner that will persevere its unique characteristics, underline that, and enhance the quality of life for the citizens, present and future. Is that something that you look at? Is that a good planning, zoning mission statement?
I think so. We have several different districts within the county. Residential agricultural is the broadest district that we have. A lot of the county is in a residential agricultural district. We have a residential district, a mixed residential district. We have a commercial district, an industrial district. Like I said, most of the Sampson County is in the RA, which is the broader district. There's a lot of things that are permittable in the residential agricultural district.
And the ag piece of this is important because we have such a large land mass that when you look at zoning, I start thinking in terms of this idea that, and it's really happening from what I've read, is that we're moving more to residential development in a lot of these areas that historically, Joel, have been cow pastures or fields. Now you go by, I know in the Raleigh area, the closer you get to Wake County, but even in Sampson County, you'll start seeing 3 or 4 houses, you start 5 or 6 houses. I can remember Timberlake when I went by and looked at it and thought, right, really, they're going to put houses out there? And now just look at it.
Yeah. And it's it's a challenge, but it's a challenge that that we need to embrace. On the one hand, we do want to encourage development in our county. We want to that allows us to, increase our tax base and provide more opportunities for our citizens, and potentially draw residents from other adjoining areas to here. But on the other hand, it is important to us that we also preserve that agricultural character. Agriculture, as we all know, is the bedrock of our economy here in this county. So there is a balance that we have to strike between, on the one hand, encouraging the type of development that you're describing, while on the other hand also ensuring that we don't forget about the important role that agriculture plays here in our county.
Anita, when you look in the areas that you were talking about, what kind of input do you get? And since you've been involved with this, which one of those segments of population do you have more activity through your door, or more phone calls about, or more specific information needed from?
The residential agricultural district, we have a lot of people that want to build a new home, add a room addition, accessory buildings, things like that, that fall into that residential agricultural district. We have a lot of bona fide farm area. If you are a farmer and you have the farm exemption tax identification, or your land is in the land use program with the tax office, there are things that we can help you with as far as putting structures on your property and things like that.
Because if you've got that, I want to kind of clarify that a little bit. Folks may not understand, but if you happen to be in that particular bracket in which you do have an ag exemption, you go in there, Joel, and say you want to cut out 2 acres and you want to put a $200,000, $300,000 home in there. That's not going to be in the ag exempt area. Is that correct?
It actually could be.
Okay.
Yeah, there are certain circumstances. So, and the General Assembly has recently been making modifications to this particular area of law. We have a zoning ordinance that governs many aspects of development here in the county, but there are also state statutes that deal with that same subject matter. So we can't, for example, enact an ordinance that restricts bona fide farms that's incompatible with state law. And in many cases, I think a residence that was on a parcel like you're describing actually would be still subject to that exemption. But I want to emphasize that that's a very case-by-case,
right,
fact-specific determination. And that's something that that people do need to understand, is that while there are certainly lines in the sand, so much of planning and zoning is fact specific.
So when I hear Joel say that, Anita, that tells me that your job then becomes very finite when you're working with individual folks that come in. You may talk to one person for 30, 40 minutes, the next person may take 2 or 3 hours.
And in some cases with subdivision developments, sometimes it takes weeks. The one thing that I would like to get out there is that we are there to help the citizens. We are there to work with them. Each case normally is individual. Very few times do you find a piece of land that's shaped the same way. They've got many different dimensions, and each permit, each request is different. And I would encourage anyone that's interested in purchasing an accessory building, adding a room addition, a house. If you have anything that you want to do on your property as far as adding a structure, come see us. Sit down, talk with us. We'll be more than glad to sit down with them and find out exactly what it is they're wanting to do, and if there's any way that we can accommodate them and keep it within the rules and regulations, that's what we want to do. We want them to be able to do the room addition and add the accessory buildings and things they want to do on their property and keep it within the rules and regulations. And each situation is different in itself, but I would encourage them to come sit down, call us. We'll be glad to sit down and discuss whatever you want to do and try to make it work for you.
Joe, I think it's so important, particularly from the rule of law perspective, is that oftentimes people maybe think, well, I live down this road, and then you turn down another road, and you go down another road, and it's 20 miles back in the woods. I can put whatever I want to. Nobody's going to know anything about it. But the other side of that picture is once they do that, and once it's discovered, legally there are ramifications, correct?
There absolutely are. And one thing that I would encourage, this sort of dovetails nicely with what Anita was just saying then, is folks, do your homework before you spend money making an addition, a modification to a structure. One thing that you can do is go on the county's GIS mapping website, and you can actually look up your parcel of land that you're making a modification to, and there's a layer on the right-hand side of that screen that you can click on, a planning layer, and it will show you, it's color-coded, it's very easy to read, what zoning district your property is in. And Anita's correct that a lot of the property in unincorporated areas of the county is RA or residential agricultural, but that's not always the case. You may be in a mixed residential district. You may be in a residential as opposed to a residential agricultural district. And the rules, whether it be setbacks or what are permitted uses, are different for those different districts. So you want to do some investigation and do some homework before you begin spending money, and we're here to assist in that process in any way that we can.
I think it's such an important point, the GIS map, because quite frankly, I'll go to that if I just want to look up something. There's a world of information, everything from it refers you to the deeds. It refers you to taxes, if there's taxes on the property. You need to know if you're going to build something what you're adjoining. Even if to look at the codes is probably the first thing. But the other thing is you can look at that and say, well, I'm only 500 feet from something that I might not want to put a structure there. Or I didn't realize when I bought this property that backing up to that was this particular not only building but business that may be operating. And in a large county with rural roads, we really have some of them need some repairs big time, but we really do have a lot of connecting roads in this county, and so you might not know what you're backing up to. Do you have people sometimes that come in and you say, you do realize over here's an issue for you?
We do. I would encourage anyone that's not familiar with the GIS to log on to the Sampson County website, and if they have trouble navigating around the GIS system, we can talk them through it step by step on the phone to enlighten them on how the system works and the information that's out there to sort of help them navigate. But it is very interesting. It gives you a different viewpoint when you're looking at it from an aerial point of view, an aerial photograph.
And I think that's the critical piece is to try to have some objectivity when they come to see you, because you need certain information. I mean, we're not saying, if you just have an idea, come then, but kind of get your information together, because you need to know location, and more specific on location. You need to know what that is. And when we come back from break, I want to kind of talk a little bit about structures themselves, because I understand there's something called a height structure in the county. We can't really put a 6 or 8 story building up or something. I don't know, but we'll talk about that when we come back. These are the kinds of things that, as folks are listening, I want them to really understand today, that before you put that foundation in, call. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned as we talk with the county attorney and with the senior planner in Sampson County about things that you're going to be investing in and, quite frankly, putting a lot of your money in. You need to know before.
You come out to replace a bad sensor, and that adds a 5-year commitment to my contract, and you don't tell me? Here's your sign.
Switch to the sign that's keeping homes secure and customers happy all over the area. Security from Star Communications. We pride ourselves on fair pricing and quick, friendly service every time.
Somebody try to break into this place?
Security from Star Communications.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us. Again, Sampson County, Bladen County, Pender County, Cumberland County, even Wayne County, parts of Wake County we have heard from, even a part of Lenoir County on this show. We're just so excited that people will call us, or I may be at some event and somebody will come up and say, hey, I heard your show about whatever the subject was. It really is enriching to me to let me know that we're really covering things that benefit you as our listening audience. And today we're covering one of those subjects that I really think impacts people in many ways that oftentimes you might not know about unless you've been into some kind of building or some property development in the recent year or 2 or 3 years. You might not realize some of the things that you need to know about to kind of save you money. We're talking with Anita Lane, who is the senior planner here in Sampson County, and Joel Starling, who is the county attorney. You really need that legal mind, Anita, when you're doing this, because a lot of it does, as Joel mentioned earlier, ties back to statute on the state level. And when we think about that, we went off there and we were talking about structures and buildings. It's my understanding there's some height regulations on certain type buildings. Is that correct? That's something I never really thought about. But then again, as I traverse the county, the tallest buildings most of the time I see is a steeple on a church. So either one of them.
Yeah. So I mean, the important thing that folks need to realize is there are a lot of dimensional requirements in our zoning ordinance, and while we don't necessarily want to, bore people reciting, 10-foot setback for an accessory building, that is the case. And what can happen is if folks, as we were talking about earlier, don't do their homework before they actually start building. For example, if I build an accessory building, an outbuilding, and I build it right up against the corner of my property, I've got an issue there because I've not complied with the setback requirements for that accessory structure. Likewise, I can't build a 40-foot accessory building typically on my lot. Most of the time there's a 20-foot cap on that. And why that becomes important is if there is a complaint or a violation is discovered, oftentimes you'll hear people say, oh, well, I'll request a variance. And a variance is a method whereby people can be relieved from the requirements of the zoning ordinance. Well, what people typically don't understand or don't appreciate is a variance is not available when you created the issue requiring the variance.
Right, you need to do that beforehand, not
right. So for example, if I've built an accessory building without checking into the setback requirements, the minimum height requirements, and then get a notice of violation from the zoning administrator, I'm not eligible for a variance then, because the only reason I need it is because I just built a building that didn't comply with the county's zoning ordinance. So in a situation like that, that person is potentially got a mess on their hands because they've spent money building a structure that's not compliant, and is probably going to have to be remedied. So that's why it's so critical that people ask these questions before they start building.
And it would be, I think it would be kind of obvious that maybe you're not going to be liked very much, Anita, when that happens.
Yeah. Fortunately, we do not run into that a whole lot. There are procedures that you can go through if you live in an area that is residential ag and you want to operate a business there. There is a rezoning application that we have that you can fill out, and the process for that is You fill out the application, accompanied by the necessary documents, and we assist you with that. It goes before the planning board, and there is a process that you can go through in order to have your property rezoned to meet the needs that you would like.
Mm-hmm. So let me make sure that not only if I tell folks sometimes if I understand it, anybody can understand it. So if I'm building, say I'm building a house and I want to put I don't know, maybe I want 3 stories in my house. Maybe I want the top floor to be 50, 60 foot in the air, and it's a 3 or 4 story house. I better get that approved, because if I don't get that approved, not only am I facing fines and liabilities, to Joel, to your point, I could very easily be facing a reality of deconstructing that building to meet guidelines.
Yeah, and we would obviously explore every possible avenue to avoid, a situation where someone had to do that. But there are possible scenarios that I can think of where there really wouldn't be a good solution to that person's problem, other than make modifications to get that construction in, compliant with the county zoning ordinance.
If somebody, go ahead.
We also work closely with the inspections department because we are under one roof. So when they take their plans to be inspected, on the building inspection side, you're going to catch things there that would hopefully eliminate someone going out there and building a structure that is not going to comply.
So basically, when they start out, when a person in the county says, I've got this property, or I've already got a building, whatever the case may be, if they're doing an add-on or they're starting from the ground up, they start with zoning, and from zoning, then it travels to inspection.
Correctly.
So there's a process.
There is a process. When they come into us first for the zoning, if it is permittable, then they take their plans to the building inspection side. They review the plans, they sign off on them if they are in compliance, and the inspectors follow that through step by step, the building process.
And I think, Joel, one of the things that strikes me, and again, I'm thinking just the average Sampson County guy, which I am, one of the things that I often will hear is that, well, look, I've got this property, and my grandfather's grandfather in 1930 built tobacco barns, and guess what? One of them still standing. So they know what they're doing, and they don't need to have nobody tell them they got to have a permit, because they built it and it's strong, and those kinds of things. But what we're talking about here is more than that. It's everything, not only from the structure itself, but the things that's in the structure, the expectation of the structure. Does it have harm benefit for others? All of those things that you might want to touch on, so folks will understand we're not talking about whether fourth generation could build good buildings, because trust me, they can. I've seen some buildings, and I know where you have too, that's been standing since the 1920s and 30s, probably some longer than that.
And they certainly could, and like you said, many of them have stood the test of time. I think the thing that's important for people to realize is we learn more and more every year about building, engineering, different materials that can mitigate possible, harm or loss. I was reading an article the other day. Now, we don't have wildfires pervasively here in this part of the country, thank goodness, but was making the point that they found in California, with a lot of the wildfires that they've had of late, that the buildings that tended to survive those firestorms were more newly built buildings that had to comply with newer building codes in terms of the materials that they were using and things like that. So while I would agree that structurally people could build things very well in decades past, we also benefit from advances, whether it comes to materials or anything else, and we try to incorporate those through building codes and zoning.
Asbestos comes up as a thought process in that. At one time, that was a building material that was highly rated, and there's still a lot of houses, I'm sure, that's on. But now we look at it, if you have that material and you're deconstructing or what have you, you got moon suits and everything else to wear.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a perfect example.
So I think I believe we're coming up on our last break. I'm not sure, but anyway, we're going to try to keep focused here, but this is a subject that not only I get involved in when I have folks like you on, and I've done a number of shows on zoning, but I want to make sure that we're covering each kind of point that you guys want to get out, because I know you get a lot of calls, Anita, and those are kinds of things we want to give voice to here, because if you could inform 50 people and not get 50 phone calls, then, or especially if you could inform 1,000 or 10,000, that would be a benefit and give you more time to address some of these long-term issues. So what have we missed to this point now that you feel like we need to really let folks understand?
Well, I still would encourage people to come to the office and to call us if they need to, because each situation is different. There is some broad information that we can put out there, but because each individual normally is different in itself, I would encourage them to call us if they have any questions or concerns or thoughts on what they are interested in doing.
Joan, touch on the planning board just a minute. I want to make sure that folks understand there's a board that also is kind of an umbrella advisory board that, and these members are very important in the community. They also help with information.
Yeah, that's a very good point to make. So we have a 7-member planning board, and depending on what function it's performing, it may be advisory, like you're talking about. For example, if I want to rezone some property from residential agricultural to commercial so that I can put a business on it, that rezoning request is going to start before the planning board, but actually the Board of Commissioners in that case would have the final say there. And we would call that a legislative type decision that the planning board would be making. Other circumstances like special use permits, for example, the planning board is going to be the final say before the case would potentially go to court in any event. For example, if I wanted to open a shooting range on my property, our county ordinance says that that's not just a permitted use. I got to get a special use permit from the planning board for that.
And that's a perfect example, and for some reason I'm calling to mind Harnett County, which I believe went through one of those same situations where there was a shooting range and some issues that were kind of built around that. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be back in a moment, and we appreciate you being with us. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on there. I want to thank you again for being with us today. The email address, and I usually repeat this because I'll get some emails and somebody say I couldn't get through, is weshouldknow@gmail.com. weshouldknow@gmail.com. All of that kind of squished together, and it'll get to our box, and we'll try to respond to you. If you send snail mail, if you're still doing that, which is perfectly fine, cards, letters, comments, Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. We'll respond to that as quick as possible and get you the information, or hopefully we'll have enough time to get that in queue and have that program on there. We're talking about planning and zoning, and we're talking with Anita Lane, the senior planner, Joel Starling, the attorney for Sampson County, stuff about things in Sampson County and surrounding counties. A lot of these issues that we're talking about today are also things folks confront in adjoining counties. Some of the people we talked about before, whether they happen to be in Bladen County, whether they happen to be in Pender County, wherever they may be, if they're listening to the show or if they're viewing on Star Communications Channel 16, they may want to check with their local planning departments for verification. But Joel, as you mentioned, this is kind of an umbrella statute from the state level. These things plug into that. Localities can have different ordinances, but typically they have some continuity, correct?
Correct. So, for example, there are certain things that the state says that no county can do. When we talk about subdivision regulations that the county have that regulate when and how you can divide property into smaller parts, the state has identified certain types of divisions that counties cannot regulate. Mm-hmm. For example, if I'm subdividing land in order to settle an estate, so someone has passed away and either with or without a will, their estate is in probate and we're dividing property up between heirs, the General Assembly has said counties are not allowed to place regulations on those types of subdivisions. But aside from those types of situations where the state has precluded us from regulating them, generally we have the ability to regulate planning and zoning and the subdivision of property pursuant to what's called our police power as a unit of local government. One thing when we talk about subdivision regulations in particular that I'd like to get out there is folks should have a conversation with their surveyors in addition to us and make their surveyors aware of what their long-term plans for their property are. So, there are certain types of subdivisions that are under our regulations are called major subdivisions, where you've got to put in, streets and other types of easements that are going to be more costly to someone trying to develop that property. And then there are minor subdivisions that are not subject to all of those regulations. Well, if I subdivide a piece of property and I only subdivide one parcel off, but I plan to subdivide 4 more off in the next 3 years, I may need to talk to my surveyor and talk to the planning department about doing that all at one time, because by doing that initial subdivision, I could have precluded myself from making those additional subdivisions for a period of time later without going through the major subdivision process.
And another thing strikes me as you're saying that a recent case here in North Carolina, and I say recently in the past few months, there was a pre-existing covenant by a power company in which some pretty nice homes were built. You may remember that. And I think that's part of an example of what you're talking about too. It needs to be legally researched as well.
It does. It's never ever a bad idea to have an attorney perform a title search. Now that would be outside the scope of what the county can provide for individual citizens, but that's always a good idea. The example you're talking about, there was an old utility easement running through this subdivision that everyone sort of forgot about apparently, and it has caused some major headaches as a result.
And these were, like, as I recall, $300,000-$400,000 homes, and in a nice neighborhood, and they were looking at a power line. I mean, we're talking huge power lines coming through there, and actually the houses would have to be either moved or demolished.
That's my understanding as well.
Yeah, it's kind of a scary thing. So something a thought just struck me though as you were talking. You must have interesting conversations around the breakfast and dinner table with 2 lawyers in the house. I'd have to ask, who always comes out?
She always wins.
Well, there you go. So we got that question answered. Somebody's going to ask me that, so we got that answered. We know who's the champion there.
That's right.
So let's get back to this idea when we're looking at, and I've got another point I want to try to cover before we go. But looking at those developments in the county, you guys are very aware that sometimes down property lines and lanes you'll see multiple mobile homes built and those kinds of things. If there's something existing now that is there that doesn't meet the guidance and the legalities of the ordinances of the county or the state, is that something that possibly could be looked at and say to folks, look, we got to have something here happening because it might be a public health issue? One of the things I think of is the dissemination of waste and those kinds of things.
So in terms of the layout, the size of the lots, things of that nature, the answer to your question depends on when it occurred. And when I say it, I mean the subdivision. Right. If you're talking about a situation where you've got a lot that predates existing regulations, that's
kind of
sort
grandfathered in.
That's the end of the analysis. But if you're talking about a subdivision that was done in violation of the county subdivision regulations, that is potentially something that could result in enforcement action. We try to look for a solution to issues like that without having to resort to that. But a lot of things that people don't know, and I'm not suggesting that we're necessarily going out charging people with offenses, but people should understand that under North Carolina law, unless the ordinance provides otherwise, violation of a county ordinance is a crime. It is a misdemeanor.
It's criminal, not civil.
It is,
Yeah.
correct. Now there are also typically civil penalties that the county has the option of pursuing instead, but for the most part, Sampson County's ordinances are subject to criminal punishment if it were to come to that. But again, that's not something that we look to as a...
This is not one of those things you want to ask forgiveness later on. You want to get it right to start with.
Correct.
So Anita, I know you got some things that you want to cover as well.
Well, I would just like for them to know, again, where we're located. We are at the county complex out off of Rowan Road. We are housed under the same roof as the inspections and environmental health, and we are more than willing to help anyone that has got any kind of plans to develop a piece of property, whether it's a subdivision, whether it's building a new home, a room addition, an accessory building, any kind of idea that they've got that they would like to pursue, ask questions about, whether it be something they want to do now or something they want to do in the near future. We're more than willing to sit down with them and discuss it.
And I would kick this in too, is that oftentimes you might be able to save them a little bit of money because they might go about it, if they go about it the wrong way and have to have it rewired or redone, it's going to cost double what they were expecting, and they get in that situation and go, wow, I wish I just took care of this to start with. And the other issue is the safety issue as well.
Our goal is to help them to get where they want to be, and our goal is to keep it within the rules and regulations of the zoning ordinances and try to get them where they want to be as well.
I've got two things I want to try to touch before we're going to be running out of time here, but one of the big things now, of course, is solar and solar energy. You're seeing panels on homes, being encouraged to do those kinds of things. Haven't seen any windmills up lately. We might have some here, but I'm not aware of them. Is that something that you guys want to speak to, particularly as it relates to adding things to existing homes or even placing structures of that nature on your property?
So that's something that actually I think has been in flux recently with the state legislature. There are some statutes that have either pending or have recently been enacted that are designed to help make it easier for people to do exactly what you're describing without having to navigate quite so much government regulation. There's also one thing that we have dealt with quite a bit of late is solar farms. Actual large 60, sometimes 100 acres, maybe even more properties where the landowners are entering into lease agreements to utilize those as solar farms. And that's something that has to go through the special use permit process that I described, I think, before the last commercial break.
When I have Steve Troxler on, Secretary of Agriculture, he will give you a strong pushback on these solar farms because they're taking up a lot of his land production, and I give him leeway on that because there is some reality of thinking about land, agricultural land being consumed more and more by solar. At some point in time, there's got to be a balancing point. I
agree with that. And you also have to ask the question, what happens to that solar farm after its lifespan?
Yeah. It's a lot of waste product there.
It is.
So Anita, one thing I wanted to mention too, you've got some folks that work in your office. It's Michelle is a planner. You want to mention her as well?
Michelle Lance is in there in the planning department. Michelle and I work in there together. We work really well together, and she's been a huge asset to the planning department. Michelle and I bounce a lot of things off of each other. If we come up with a situation that's a little out of the ordinary that one of the citizens come in and we bounce it off of one another and try to critique it and give them ideas. If they come in with an idea of something they want to do and it doesn't necessarily fit within the zoning ordinance, we try to come up with some ideas together to change some things around, give them some options of some different ways that they can accomplish what they want to accomplish, but keep it within the rules and regulations.
Well, I want to thank both of you guys for being with us today, and maybe next time we can get Michelle on and we can let you sit right here and do some bouncing back and forth on that. Appreciate your service to the county, and I look forward to talking to you again, but we're now at closure, so we're going to have to kick out for this week. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. We look forward to seeing you again next week right here. And as always,
thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.